In the vibrant, memory-filled life of college, nothing compares to the all-night parties that define the experience. Young, energetic students with a fearless, anything-goes attitude often treat each night as an opportunity to create unforgettable stories. But sometimes, those stories go far beyond expectations, turning into experiences no one wants to repeat. That evening, under the dim lights of the dormitory, a group of students were happily savoring the last moments of the party. Laughter, music, and the smell of alcohol blended into the air. But then, like in every thrilling action movie, the arrival of the police turned the atmosphere into an unexpected confrontation. A 20-year-old student, drunk but full of courage, decided to challenge fate by pushing an officer. And in an instant, everything changed. Welcome to a true story captured by a body cam, where the fun moments of student life quickly turned into a dramatic action scene worthy of a Hollywood film. Join us as we follow the satirical and humorous twists of this event, showing that sometimes being drunk can lead to unforgettable experiences. Literally. The night sky over the dormitory was quiet, if you ignored the pulsating EDM music blaring from the second-floor window, loud enough to make the glass panes vibrate. The yellow streetlights cast a dull glow, creating shadows that made everything look like a dark, moody black-and-white movie scene. Two officers appeared, dressed head to toe in black uniforms, trying to appear serious, but looking more like two ninjas who had just escaped an amateur martial arts class. With heavy steps, they approached a group of students huddled under the streetlights, chatting as if planning their next party. IDs? One officer spoke up, his voice authoritative, as if preparing to catch a group of middle schoolers sneaking a smoke after class. The students fell silent, some exchanging glances as though they weren't quite ready for this confrontation. Jake, a sophomore with messy hair and the dreamy eyes of someone who had just had one too many drinks, quickly pointed upward, a half smile on his face, flushed from alcohol. "You guys are looking in the wrong place. The real party animals are upstairs. We're just the peaceful residents down here." His voice sounded confident, as if he had just made a big breakthrough in helping the officers find the real culprits. His friends around him chuckled, though it was unclear if it was from Jake's joke or the effect of the mysterious drink they had just consumed. The officers exchanged a glance, silently communicating, "Oh, so you think we're idiots?" However, they maintained their composure, even though their patience was clearly starting to wear thin. One of them moved closer, his leather gloves making clicking sounds like an ominous warning, and began searching through the thin, flimsy wallets the students reluctantly handed over. It felt as though they were inspecting pencil cases that school kids typically use to hide candy during class. Meanwhile, a girl behind, probably Jake's friend, reached into her tight jeans pocket and pulled out an ID with a photo that looked nothing like her. This is mine, but I swear I'm over 21, she said, with an innocent tone that sounded like a child caught red-handed stealing candy. The officer didn't bother arguing and continued checking each wallet, his eyes glancing at the beer cans awkwardly hidden behind the students' backs as if they could magically disappear. The group of students gradually started to lose their excitement, their initial thrill fading away like soap bubbles. No one dared to make a move, but the tension was quietly rising, as if the slightest breeze could turn it into a real explosion. And perhaps this was just the beginning of a memorable night the students would recount for years to come. Seeing the officer's persistence, the group began to show signs of discomfort. Sarah, a girl with brightly dyed green hair and a sharp gaze that seemed to pierce through the officers' uniforms, took a step forward. She gripped the pizza box she had just taken from a friend, as if it were her final line of defense. "Why do you need our IDs? We're just eating pizza." Her voice rang out, loud enough to drown out the EDM blaring from the upstairs. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as if scrutinizing every wrinkle on the officer's face. The people around her immediately fell silent, creating a moment of tension that felt like the calm before an explosion. The older officer, with a potbelly hidden beneath his bulletproof vest, sneered. "You don't want to show IDs? No problem. You'll get a referral," he said in a threatening tone, emphasizing referral as though it were a death sentence. The way he spoke made Sarah immediately think of her high school principal, who would always threaten to punish the entire class for not arranging the desks neatly. The group of students began to murmur, a few discreetly hiding beer cans behind their backs, but Sarah had no intention of backing down. She stood tall, took a deep breath as if preparing for the final round of an argument. "Do we have the right to refuse? I'm pretty sure the law doesn't require us to show IDs in this case," Sarah declared, her voice full of defiance. She waved her hand like a lawyer defending her client, though in this case, the client was her group of over-inebriated friends. The second officer, younger but clearly running low on patience, stepped forward with a cold expression. "No, you don't have the right, sweetheart," he replied, his lips barely twitching, his gaze sharp like a knife. "You're gathered here making noise, drinking illegally, and we have the right to ask for IDs. If you continue obstructing us, there will be more charges." Sarah rolled her eyes, clearly unfazed. "Oh, so you guys like to threaten students, huh? You know what? We're recording everything. Let's see who gets punished." She then pulled out her phone, hit the video recording button, while her friends cheered as if they were watching an epic verbal duel. The older officer sighed, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe he was facing such a chatty group of students. The atmosphere grew even more tense, with the EDM music now providing a strange soundtrack to the endless standoff. Some other students began pulling out their phones to record the situation, adding to the chaotic vibe of the space. As the situation began to escalate, the younger officer stepped closer to Sarah, his hand resting on the radio, ready to call for backup. "All right, if you want to make this difficult, we can take more drastic measures," he said, his tone firm. But Sarah, unshaken, took a step forward, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Go ahead, try me. I'm not afraid." Nearby, Jake, the student with messy hair from the start of the story, stood quietly, nervously swallowing. It seemed he was beginning to realize that tonight was not just a casual gathering, but something much more complicated. While the standoff between Sarah and the officer was still tense, an unexpected event occurred. From the other side, Tom, the tall, unsteady student, swaying like a drunk mannequin, accidentally dropped a pile of ID cards from his jacket pocket. The plastic cards scattered on the ground like autumn leaves, and in full view of everyone, he stood there, dazed and awkward, not knowing what to do. The atmosphere suddenly froze, and all eyes turned toward Tom. One officer crouched down, picking up several of the cards, squinting at each one. "Oh, is this a real ID? Or just a bar pass?" he sneered, a half-smirk curling on his lips as if mocking Tom. The IDs in the officer's hand had different names, but the same familiar face, Tom's, each card showing a different version of him. Slicked back hair, scruffy beard, or a bright smile as if posing for a magazine cover. Tom, his face turning bright red, not just from alcohol but also from embarrassment, forced a sheepish laugh. Those, they're just souvenirs. My friends gave them to me for my birthday," he stammered, awkwardly trying to shove the cards back into his pocket, but clearly failing. A few cards slipped out and lay at his feet like undeniable pieces of evidence. The officer stared at him intently, his eyebrows raised as if he had just discovered treasure. "Quite the ID collection you have here, huh? Or are you actually a person with multiple personalities?" he said, half joking, half serious, causing Tom's friends to giggle. But Tom's smile quickly faded, and he began to sweat profusely, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead, as if summer had suddenly arrived on a chilly fall night. Realizing things were turning from bad to worse, Tom tried to explain himself. No, those are just toys." He scratched his head and tried to force a nervous grin, but the officer wasn't buying it. "Toys? Then why do they have anti-counterfeit holograms on them?" he said, his voice dripping with suspicion. The officer's eyes lit up like a cat spotting its prey. In that moment, Tom knew he was trapped. He looked around desperately, hoping for help from his friends, but they all stepped back, as if trying to distance themselves from the criminal who had just been caught. Jake, standing nearby, whispered, "You're done for, Tom. This time you're in real trouble." The argument showed no signs of cooling down, and just as the tension reached its peak, a different student suddenly stepped forward from the crowd, as though he had just been summoned from a Hollywood action film. He had messy hair, eyes filled with determination, and a tall, imposing figure that made him seem like an unspoken leader in the dorms. Let's call him Ryan. Ryan stood tall under the pale streetlights, stretching as though ready for a heated confrontation. "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have the right to arrest me," he yelled, his voice echoing like thunder. The students around him collectively gasped, eyes wide with a mix of admiration and fear. The crowd began to murmur, many of them pulling out their phones, as if watching an impromptu fight unfold. The officer, still calm as if facing a stubborn child, shrugged indifferently. "Guess I'll have to arrest you, or no one will believe you," he said, his tone laced with sarcasm, his gaze never leaving Ryan. Without wasting a second, the officer reached for his radio to signal for backup, his other hand resting on the handcuffs at his belt. Ryan wasn't backing down. He took a step forward, standing face to face with the officer, the distance between them only a few centimeters. "Who do you think you are? This is student territory, not your police station." Ryan continued, his voice growing louder, nearly shouting in the officer's face. The air thickened. Everything around them seemed to slow down, with only the pounding of hearts and the rapid breaths of the onlookers filling the space. Other officers began to move closer, hands hovering near their riot gear, as though preparing for whatever might come next. A second officer, tall and solid like a rock, stepped forward, trying to keep his voice calm. "Listen, kid, no one wants to escalate this, but if you don't cooperate, we'll have to take stronger measures." Ryan narrowed his eyes, sizing up the officer, as if trying to figure out if he was really willing to follow through. He smirked, a challenge in his expression. "What are you going to do? Pepper spray me? Shoot me? I haven't done anything wrong." The words exploded in the air like an unwelcome detonation. Ryan's friends cheered, their spirits lifted by his defiant stance. One girl shouted from the back, "Ryan, we're not scared. We've got your back." The first officer, losing his patience, said nothing more but motioned to his team. In an instant, the strong hands of two officers grabbed Ryan, trying to subdue him. Ryan struggled, trying to break free, but it was clear he had no chance against the strength of the two trained men. "Let me go! I have my rights!" Ryan shouted, struggling to break free. But then a sharp hiss sounded, and in an instant, pepper spray shot directly into his face. Ryan collapsed to the ground, clutching his face with both hands, his eyes squeezed shut in excruciating pain. His agonized cries echoed through the air, drowning out even the EDM music from the second floor. The students around him quickly stepped back, some screaming in shock. "Oh my God! They really sprayed pepper spray!" a girl shouted, her hands shaking as she recorded the scene on her phone. Ryan was now a tangled mess on the ground, his voice shifting from defiance to desperation. "Please, wash my eyes. I can't breathe." The officers, now looking uneasy, quickly pulled Ryan aside, trying to use saline solution to ease the pain. But it was clear that they had crossed a line, and the situation had escalated far beyond what had started as an ID check. In a surprising twist, like something out of a comedy action film, just as everything seemed to be calming down, a drunken student stumbled out of the crowd, as if waking from a long sleep. He wobbled, his eyes glazed and his breath reeking of alcohol, but his courage appeared to be at a peak. This hero, let's call him Kevin, seemed determined to make his mark on the night, though in the most misguided way possible. Before anyone could react, Kevin, with determined eyes but staggering steps, approached the nearest officer. In a misguided attempt to assert his authority, he raised his hand and lightly pushed the officer's shoulder, as though it were a harmless joke among friends. Pushed might be too strong a word. It was more like an awkward nudge, but with the drunken bravado and youthful recklessness, he thought he had done something impressive. The officer, caught off guard by the shove, stumbled back a step, his eyes wide in disbelief. "Oh my God!" he exclaimed, a mix of surprise and irritation, as though he had just been poked by a hornet's nest. Without a second's hesitation, his professional instincts kicked in. His hand swiftly reached for his pepper spray, moving like a pro, as if he were a marksman in the Olympics. Before the surrounding students could comprehend what was happening, a sharp pshh sounded, signaling the beginning of the nightmare. The pepper spray shot out with the speed of light, spreading through the air like an eerie fog, transforming the campus into a chaotic scene straight out of a horror movie. Kevin, once the defiant challenger, was suddenly the unlucky victim, immediately clutching his face and screaming in agony as if bitten by a snake. "Ah! Damn it, I can't breathe!" Kevin writhed on the ground, clawing at the air as though trying to grab something to escape the searing pain burning through his eyes. The other students in his group quickly scattered, like pigeons being chased away, shouting and covering their mouths, trying to distance themselves from the expanding cloud of pepper spray. "Back up! Everyone, back up!" another officer yelled, trying to maintain order as the crowd panicked. A student nearby got caught in the spray, tears streaming down her face, screaming, "Oh my God, I can't see anything!" before spinning in circles like a dizzy top. Others coughed violently, covering their eyes, some rushing toward the nearest bathroom to wash their faces. Meanwhile, Kevin continued to writhe on the ground, screaming as if thrown into a cauldron of fire. "I have asthma! Are you trying to kill me?" he yelled, his voice choking as he coughed and cried. The officer who had sprayed the pepper spray hesitated for a moment, but still tried to remain calm, shouting, "Calm down! Someone, bring water!" Another officer quickly moved forward with a bottle of saline solution, trying to pour it into Kevin's eyes, while two other officers stood guard around him, ensuring there were no more incidents from the other students. The distant wail of police sirens could be heard, signaling that the night was far from over. And so, the fun night that started as a harmless ID check quickly spiraled into an unexpected chaos, with Kevin becoming the unlikely star, though certainly not by choice, of a viral video that would circulate the next morning on social media. The air had grown thick and suffocating, but not because of the asthma of the student, but because of the chaos that had just unfolded. The student who had been sprayed with pepper spray, likely Kevin, the reckless young man who had dared to challenge the police, was now writhing on the ground. His face twisted in agony, his hands clawing at the air, his screams echoing as though he were playing the lead in a tragic scene from a play. "Oh my God, I have asthma." His words sounded like a desperate cry for help, but with a touch of overacting, as though he were an amateur actor trying to win an Oscar for best performance. The surrounding students, who had laughed at first, were now genuinely concerned. Some took out their phones to record, while others stepped back, afraid of getting caught in the expanding cloud of pepper spray. The officer nearest to Kevin, still stunned by the unexpected shove, quickly shifted from tough cop mode to emergency responder. Though not a doctor, the moment made him feel like he was on an episode of Dr. House. He grabbed a bottle of saline solution from his first aid kit and crouched beside Kevin, who was still writhing. "Calm down! Let me help!" the officer shouted, trying to drown out the loud cries around them. Whether saline solution was the right treatment or not didn't matter. The officer opened the bottle and poured it into Kevin's eyes as though trying to extinguish a blazing torch. Kevin flinched, the solution spilling all over his face, dripping onto his sweat-soaked t-shirt. "Oh, it hurts so much. My eyes. I'm gonna die," he cried, his tone now even more tragic than a Shakespearean actor in a dramatic scene. "Try to open your eyes, kid," the officer said, continuing to squeeze the saline bottle, desperately trying to flush out the effects of the pepper spray. He appeared as serious as though performing a complex medical procedure, even though he was just trying to soothe the aftermath of a spray attack. The group of students around them started whispering to each other, unsure whether they should intervene or leave the officer to experiment with medicine. "He seems to be making things worse," a girl whispered, covering her mouth to suppress a laugh. Another muttered, "I'm not sure if he's saving him or torturing him." In the midst of this uproar, another officer approached, placing a hand on his colleague's shoulder, as if to remind him that they were cops, not paramedics. "Hey, calm down. We just need to wait for the ambulance," he said, his voice tinged with fatigue. But the doctor, house officer, remained persistent. "Just a little longer. I think we're almost done here. Finally, Kevin managed to crack open his eyes, but all he could see was a hazy blur. The flashing of flashlight beams, the worried faces of his friends, and the stern eyes of the police officers. He gasped for breath, as though he had just come up for air after being submerged underwater. I need to breathe, Kevin mumbled, though no one was quite sure what he meant. An officer immediately signaled to another to call for an ambulance, as they certainly didn't want to be accused of handling a student and causing injury. The situation kept becoming more absurd, and anyone who had witnessed it from beginning to end would likely feel as though they had just watched an outstanding situational comedy, where law enforcement and drunken students were putting on an unplanned performance. When the saline didn't have the miraculous effect they had hoped for, Kevin continued to scream, "I can't breathe! Take off the cuffs!" "These cuffs are for your safety and ours," the officer reassured him, though no one could reassure Kevin about the burning effects of the pepper spray. The officers then switched to their friendly cop mode, trying to make the victim feel more comfortable, though he continued to cry, "You're ruining my life. I just want to graduate." One officer smiled gently and said, "Don't worry, it's just a referral. You'll have a good story to tell when you apply for jobs later." Finally, after nearly an hour of struggling like a dramatic soccer match, the officers decided to forego a severe punishment and focused on writing a series of referrals, like yearbook signatures. When everything finally calmed down, one officer looked at his colleague and said, "Well, that was a strange shift." The other nodded, his eyes showing a mix of exhaustion and a bittersweet humor. They climbed into their patrol car, leaving behind a campus that had just endured an unwanted battle. Sometimes parties that seem harmless can quickly turn into a nightmare because of a little recklessness and a few poor decisions. For the students, this was likely a hard lesson in respecting the law, and that challenging the police is never a good idea, especially when you've had too much to drink. As for the officers, sometimes they have to play the role of both an unwilling doctor and a comedian. Ultimately, whether you're a student or a cop, we can all agree. The best way to avoid pepper spray is to never put yourself in a situation where it's needed.